What's up, everybody? It is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you via cincyjungle.com and the Believe Podcast Network now. Getting at it. Hopefully you've been able to find that feed. We'll be continuing to share that and a lot of different things so you can all resubscribe if you're on the audio side of things. If you're on the video side, you can still get us on a number of different platforms, on a number of different Twitter accounts, as well as the Cincy Jungle Facebook page and our Orange and Black Insider YouTube channel. You can subscribe to that underneath John there by that CJ icon. There is an OBI show icon. Click that. Click the subsequent subscribe button, as well as the bell to be notified when we go live and when new content is available. And give us a thumbs up on the YouTube channel if you can. Give us a thumbs up on Facebook too. And of course, leave us a rating on the your favorite audio platform, hopefully a 5-star one. We've got all the main cast of characters. We've also got some pretty exciting announcements I'll tell you about at the end of the show as well. But yeah, I'm Anthony, by the way. And he is John. John wearing the wild shirt today. I love it. How you doing, man?
Get a little tropical theme. Gonna hit up some friends for a little World Fair type situation going on up in Dayton. So I figured, just a little festive
World
for the occasion.
Fair.
Yeah, gonna try some different food from different cultures, if you will. So that's gonna be a lot of fun. But shout out to you, Anthony, for really carrying this channel for the past week. I wrote like 30-something articles for A to Z. I slept like 10 hours throughout the draft, and you didn't sleep very much either, but you carried it on the audio side, so I appreciate you and Jason for really hammering down the live draft coverage. And now here I am a week later, I guess, talking about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, we all kind of hit it from different angles. So, I did some writing. I did some of this stuff. You did a lot of writing. You were with us one of the nights, weren't you?
The first night, yeah.
Yeah, first night, yeah. So anyway, no, thank you. And we're chugging along. And now, on the horizon is the schedule release. So we'll talk more about that down the road when that comes about. But Jason and I kind of gave, our grades and our, different things about the draft, but we didn't get yours, and we didn't get your take on some of your favorite picks, your best values and all of that. So I want you to kind of, here's how I classified, and I think, some other outlets have been echoing it a little bit to this point. Here's how I classified this class. It's a high risk, high reward class, right? The Bengals kind of did some swing for the fences type of stuff. We talked about the potential pendulum with Amarius Mims, right? The injury stuff, the lack of tape, along with outstanding tape that is there, and the athleticism, the size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You go down into the Jermaine Burton situation. There is risk that you're potentially taking on there. It seems that the Bengals are pretty comfortable with what they have learned about him in the draft process. And then, of course, you keep going down to Eric All, the injury history. So there's a lot of risk, but there is a lot of potential upside if all of these guys, these question marks, hit into varying degrees. So that's kind of how I viewed it. I don't know if you viewed the whole class or most of the class that way, and just what you would label this class if you had to put a label on it.
I think I had a similar initial evaluation, with it being like there's guys with injury history, obviously Burden with, at the time we didn't really know the extent of the character concerns, and obviously that's 3 of the first 5 picks that they made, so those are going to be the picks that are the most important, so that's fine to headline it like that. I think the more that I looked into like the prospects in depth and just really dive into their profiles, I didn't really see much of like a high risk as much as like the high ceiling is definitely there though, and that's different from maybe years past. Like last year when they drafted Miles Murphy, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle, I thought all three of those guys like knew what they were doing. They were solid football players, but the ceiling for those guys wasn't really there. And I think the best way to draft, especially when you're a team set up pretty well like the Bengals, and when you have an opportunity to draft maybe higher than you would expect in normal years, you have to take chances at players that really elevate the ceiling of your roster. And with Marius Mims, like, yes, everyone's going to look at the lack of playing time or the lack of starting experience and this injury riddled past year that he had, but he's got the potential, the legitimate potential, not just like, oh, it's a fairy tale, based off of just nonsense. No, like the tape and the athleticism and the data says that this guy has a legitimate, achievable chance of being an all-pro tackle, and that's just unheard of when you're talking about the Bengals ever since they drafted Andrew Whitworth, right? Jermaine Burton, for being drafted in the third round, having the skill set and the production of a potential, top 2 wide receiver in your offense. Like that's rare in and of itself. And to have the skill set that he has that the Bengals have desperately needed to go alongside of Jamar Chase for the past couple of years. Eric All is like the perfect situation of finding that day 3 tight end who can become a long-term starter. And everything in his data profile speaks that, yeah, like on average, like guys with this production and with this athleticism at this size, they have a good chance of being a long-term starter. And the fact that you can get like Eric All or maybe Tanner McLaughlin or Matt Lee, who was a phenomenal steal in the 7th round, the fact that you could potentially get 3 significant contributors picked after the first 100 picks, that's also been a complete rarity for the Bengals in recent years, outside of maybe Evan McPherson. So the fact that they were able to hit on all these guys all throughout the draft and really bookend the draft with 2 high-end offensive lineman athletes, like that's unheard of in a single Bengals draft. It really elevated my opinion of the draft, and maybe like sure, there's still some risk with it, but that's just the draft in itself. Like you never know how these guys are going to turn out, but the fact that these guys have legitimate, achievable chances of reaching high quality outcomes, meaning like being a long-term starter and a significant contributor for your team for years to come and playing at a decent level, like that makes it, I think, one of the better drafts in recent memory for them.
So it's funny, man, because everybody gets hyped up about the first round, and I get it. There's a lot of excitement. Those are premier players that are coming out in the class. I personally enjoy night 2 the most, just because there's more picks and you're still, highly familiar with a lot of players, and that's when you kind of start seeing value picks like Burton. I mean, other drafts. I said this last weekend. Other drafts, not only other drafts, but without some of the history that he has with off-field stuff, or I guess sort of on-field. I think he's probably picked where your Lad McConkey's or, where T. Higgins was picked, maybe even earlier, right? I mean, that's what the tape shows. There's just other stuff. And so I personally like night 2 the most, but I think I like what the Bengals did as I continue to look at this class. I think I like what the Bengals did on day 3 the most. And yeah, it's easy to say that because they had the most picks, but I think McLaughlin was a steal. I think he was an absolute steal. I think Lee has starter potential down the road. Like you said, I think he needs to bulk up a little bit, but I mean, his technique and mechanics and everything, I mean, he's got it, right? I mean, that's a potential long-term starter. And then, you look at All, who I think can kind of be a nice, do it all weapon for the Bengals in this offense. So, I mean, it's you got some pass rush upside too in that class. So there's a lot of things I like, especially on day 3. I was a little surprised that with the extra picks and all of that the Bengals did not maneuver at all in this class. I thought maybe they would have played with some things and, moved up for a quote unquote premier player, but they did what they do the vast majority of the time, which is let things come to them. And they feel like they got in really every round. They feel like by doing so, they got really, really good players.
According to them, like they tried, and that's what every team is going to say. I think Mike Potts, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but he said like they exhausted their version of the trade value chart. They were looking over it constantly, specifically on day 2. And, like there's the idea that like a trade up for a Johnny Newton was in the cards because he was above the rest of the guys that was in that group of players that they were looking at, and Chris Jenkins was obviously part of that, and they watched Chris Jenkins fall to them, and they made the easy pick for them. But I think the concern, not necessarily the concern, or like the hesitancy behind like, yes, they have 10 picks, they're probably going to trade up. It's about what picks are you giving up to do that. And again, the only time that they've traded up in the first 2 rounds in recent memory was Cam Taylor-Britt a couple years ago, and they only gave up a 6th-round pick. So if they couldn't, package a fair deal for any teams that are drafting like the late 30s or early 40s, they weren't willing to, take a single day 3 pick or maybe just 2 late day 3 picks, which I don't imagine the Bengals wanted to pick 4 times at, the 6th round and beyond. That was just kind of the bed that they settled in because no team would take their offers, or it just never really came together. So I do believe that they didn't want to have 10 picks because I think at least 2 of those, 6th, 7th round picks were definitely reflective of, these guys were probably priority free agent targets, and that's kind of how you use 7th round picks anyways, depending on how your board kind of falls. So yeah, I was surprised too, but I also know that they don't like giving up, picks inside like the top 150 in order to move up. So at the end of the day, I'm not that surprised, I guess.
I mean, best value and favorite picks kind of play into each other a little bit here. I mean, if you had to kind of say, hey, this was the one that was the home run or home runs of this class for the Bengals, and or, hey, getting this guy in this round is really, really good value. I mentioned McLaughlin, and I point to Daniel Jeremiah and his evaluation of him, saying that he had him as his 2nd best tight end behind Brock Bowers in this class. And you go, man, you're getting that guy in the 6th round? And I don't know if you watch the telecast, ESPN's Matt Miller and I think Louis Riddick as well, but Matt Miller especially is like, I don't get why this guy is here. I don't get it. And the only thing I can think of with him is that maybe he's more of the traditional, well-rounded tight end and not so much the explosive pass catching that is so in vogue right now, pass catching tight end in the league. And maybe that, diminishes the value. I think he's just a solid player. So for me, that was kind of the best value, especially with, not only what I've seen, but others whom I really trust their evaluations of him. So I don't know if you agree with that. I don't know if you have a couple of others that you're saying, wow, this was really, really good value for the Bengals in this class.
The one that stands out obviously is Matt Lee. I think just because he was graded, pretty consensus wise. I mean, the consensus board only had him in like the 200s, but a lot of trustworthy people thought that was being pretty harsh on him. I think athletes like that who were that consistent in college, anywhere on the offensive line, like the reason why he dropped is because he only played center and he's undersized, right? So teams are going to look at
and he's a little older, right?
I think he's 20. He's 22 now. He's about to be 23.
Yeah.
So he's like a 5th year guy. So he's actually kind of young, maybe for a 5th year player. But yeah, he's not like 21 or anything. Like Cedric Johnson is still 21. It was surprising to see maybe him fall all the way down there. But he has like as good of a chance to be a future starter as any 7th round pick in this class, or as any really like late day 3 pick in this class, just based off of just the objective data that we have in front of us. With McLaughlin, I understood because he was 25 and maybe teams didn't really see him as much of an inline guy. Like I think he's really positioned well to take over for like Tanner Hudson in a year, just like a receiver tight end who can be, detached from the line of scrimmage and play in the slot, and he's already really comfortable in that role. So I can understand maybe if they didn't really see a lot of blocking value with him, and also because he was a 6-year guy who's again going to be 25 this year. Maybe he's already 25. He's one of the oldest players in this class, so that made sense as to why maybe he kind of slipped through the cracks. I still look at Eric All though, and I know some people didn't expect him maybe to even be drafted as early as the 4th round, but everything checks, man. Like obviously the worry about like Tyler Eifert obviously suffered like different injury after different injury, and nothing ever really seemed to like track or like be a consistent pattern. And maybe that's the concern with All, because a back injury and a torn ACL have nothing to do with each other. But you're concerned, especially at that position, that a player is going to break down eventually. But the 4th round and beyond is when you take a swing on these guys, and the production, even in like the Iowa offense is just in a league of its own, and you have to take it for what it is. But he produced like other tight ends that come out of that offense in the sample size that he was in, and he produced pretty well in his 1 year as a starter at Michigan. So like where they drafted him, the type of athlete that he was projected to be, and the production that he has at that size and all around ability, it's a really good 4th-round pick. It gives him, in my opinion, just as much of a chance to be a starter as Chris Jenkins or Jermaine Burton. So obviously, the later that you get that guy, the better value that it is. So those three really stand out to me for sure.
And feel free to disagree with me, but I mean, I liked the blend of long-term foresight and short-term capability in this class, right? So Mims probably going to be, developed for a year, behind the two big tackles there. Maybe get some spot starts in there if there is, the kind of the story with Trent Brown is some injury stuff. So if there is an injury there, maybe some spot starts. Hopefully that isn't the case because Brown is playing well and is healthy. But this is a guy who could get some spot starts, but he is a long-term guy. Jenkins, I think, is a short-term solution right now, right? They didn't do much in the way of run stoppers in free agency, and this is kind of what his forte is, at least as of right now. So that's kind of a short-term solution. Burton provides short-term solution and long-term solution with the T. Higgins question marks, right? So you look down all again, weak position group, but he's got some injury stuff, and so there's short-term and long-term. Same with McLaughlin. My point is I really like just kind of the blend of putting together, not really kind of meshing needs and getting good value and getting guys that, there's few that could be heavy contributors right away, but some are developmental and longer term projections for this team.
I'm glad you brought up Jenkins and Burton because I feel like I haven't talked about him yet. I don't dislike those picks at all. I think obviously Burton has the case of obviously being great value just because of how he dropped and how teams had him rated just on the field. But you're right, like he's definitely got the chance to play the most snaps out of this crop of rookies as that third receiver. That role is not going to be just what Tyler Boyd was, and I think we're going to see very hints and glimpses of that as rookie minicamps and OTAs kind of begin. With Jenkins, I think it was a very type of Miles Murphy type pick where you're getting a pretty elite athlete along the defensive line who had some production questions. And I think with Jenkins specifically, it's a matter of, was this guy, and we talked about him when we did the wheel, right? Like he was a better run defender at Michigan than he was a pass rusher. And the question is, did they trust him to just do those specific responsibilities and holding his gaps and two-gapping and not being aggressive because that was what he was really good at? Or is it just a matter of they didn't trust him to consistently rush the passer, and that's why they had, Michigan has like a platoon of defensive linemen. They go in and out, and they're all high-level players, but they're all niche players as well. So Jenkins' niche was stopping the run. And when you take a guy in the top 50 at defensive tackle who's a freak athlete like he is, you do expect him to produce as a pass rusher. So that would be the biggest question with him, but he's a very safe player because you know what he can do. He's already one of the 3 best defensive tackles in this class, and like you said, he's going to play now. He's going to play 500 snaps because they needed bodies there, but also, Sheldon Rankins is only here for 2 years. BJ Hill's a free agent after this year. His role is only going to increase, and you hope that with more exposure, more opportunities, in a more diverse role that he gets with the Bengals, you hope to see that type of production kind of get an uptick.
Yeah, and Marion Hobby, he knows how to generate pass rush, right? When the Bengals got him from the Dolphins, he was coming from a defense that, had guys that were getting after the quarterback left and right. It's kind of been that way, largely from Trey Hendrickson, but it's kind of been that way from since he's been here with the Bengals defensive line. And so, you hope that Hobby can kind of mold Jenkins or groom a pass rush technique. You know what I said this too. What I like about Jenkins is kind of the lateral movement across the wash of the line, right, to make the run stop. That's what he kind of can maneuver around very, very well. And then obviously, as you saw, what was that exercise that they keep doing where he's
Turkish
bringing
get-ups.
up that huge Turkish get-ups. So you could see the strength there because that's an insane exercise. But yeah, so all in all, pretty good class. And then as T. Martin notes in the YouTube chat, the Bengals also got one of the better punters as a UDFA. So going to be interesting to see too if there's a high competition there between McNamara and Brad Robbins, and if there is, who wins that out, right? That's one area to look, and I'd want to get your thoughts on that. But also, you touched on it just a couple minutes ago. All of a sudden, crowded tight end room, John. Crowded. That was like the most bare position. Now you're going, Okay, you got Gesicki, you got Hudson, you got Sample back on a pretty big deal, at least for him. And then you drafted 2 tight ends. I mean, are you keeping all 5? Are you getting creative with the roster? Are you calling Sample something else? What are you doing? Is someone starting off on PUP? What's the deal? Is Hudson somehow the guy that played pretty well last year? Is he the odd man out going forward? I don't know, but crowded tight end group, a good problem to have finally at this position group for the Bengals.
Yeah, and we talked about McLaughlin just kind of being there in the 6th round and them having him graded much higher. I think they just saw that as like, we can't not take this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the position wasn't necessarily a strength to begin with. So I don't think the expectation was to double down at tight end. But now that they're here, I think there is a good chance that all 5 are kept. And the reason why that could happen is because I think they can go light at running back and only have Zach Moss, Chase Brown, Trevion Williams as your 3 running backs. You're already playing Drew Sample essentially in the backfield like half of his snaps. I don't think they list him as a fullback / H-back officially on the roster. I think he could still be listed as a tight end because he's still going to take inline snaps. They still need him to block, next to like the tackles for those types of personnel concepts and whatnot. But I think he can, like, they're still going to use him, I think, in pass protection. And I think they still found that type of niche role for him. So that gives you like 4 true tight ends. And I say true, 3 of them, or at least 2 of them, 3 of them are going to be like the receiver type mold with Gesicki, Hudson, and McLaughlin. And again, like McLaughlin is the perfect future replacement for either Gesicki or Hudson in that role. I think that just fits so perfectly. Whereas All is at the moment like your most all-around tight end because he's a legitimate receiver down the field, but he can also block in line and he can also line up in the wing back and detach from the line of scrimmage and all those different things. So I think there's a realistic chance that obviously both rookies make the team. Hudson keeps his job because they found value in him, and that's another receiver to just add as immediate depth behind Gesicki. And then they still have Drew Sample as this Swiss Army knife who plays in the backfield, but he's also blocking down on defensive linemen. So I think there's a good chance that all 5 of them make it, even if they aren't all 5 true tight ends.
Well, we've had a couple of our guy Jason Garrison saying keep 5 teams and finally cut Chris Evans, and then what was the other? I think it was Dan the man. Question for here we go. Question for John and Anthony: should the massive size on our O-line translate into improved short yardage success? I assume that means on the ground. So here's the thing. When I look at the running back situation and what the Bengals didn't do, I was pretty surprised the Bengals did not go after a running back in this year's class. Estimate went off the board, I think 2 picks before they picked again in the 5th. So that I'm a little surprised at some of that. And I do want to answer the question from Dan there, but I mean, your take on the running back spot now that, the Bengals invested in the offensive line and reinvested in tight ends who can at least get in there and block a bit with the 2 draft picks. And then, again, just the big tackles and what they're trying to do running back by committee. I mean, do you see a sense of improvement? Were you surprised that the Bengals did not draft a running back in this year's class? And do you still see a sense of improvement in the element that Dan mentioned, short yardage situation and/or, with this running back by committee?
Considering they had 10 picks, yeah, I was surprised that they didn't take a running back. I think it was a situation where, like last year, tight end, they were looking for one. The board never really fell their way. I remember it was between like the 4th and 5th round. There was kind of that run on running backs. I think Estime went like 2 picks before they picked Josh Newton in the 5th round. That might have been a target for them as well, even if Newton plays the more important position. So yeah, I was a little surprised that they didn't come away with a running back. It's obviously a position that kind of gets hemorrhaged at cut down days and for the waiver wire. So that's always going to be something that, like, that's how Samaje Perine joined the team back in 2019 or 2020. Like, he was a waiver cut right before the season began. Obviously, he became an immediate depth piece for them. So I think it's a position where you don't have to attack it in the draft. There's always going to be running backs available. The issue, obviously, is if Trevion Williams is your 3rd running back, it's not necessarily a strong 3rd running back. The thing for me, though, is I don't really see the need to carry more than 3 outside of special teams value. Chris Evans doesn't really give you much of that anyways because Trayvon Williams literally took his job as the kickoff returner. You're going to have Moss and Brown share touches throughout the game, and it's going to be a true 1-2 punch. It's not going to be one guy's taking 20 carries one week, the other guy's taking 20 the next. No, these guys are going to be in and out throughout the game and, used with their own special abilities and used accordingly with that. So I think 3 on the active roster is fine. You can have 1 or 2 guys on the practice squad just have throughout the season. Obviously, if injuries occur, you can elevate one of those guys. And again, there's going to be talented players at that position available right now. Like you got a guy like Cam Akers, who I think would make sense, like a depth signing. There's going to be guys who are going to be cut anyways that maybe you had your eyes on in undrafted free agency that you weren't able to sign. So there are other avenues with doing this. But as far as shorter yardage situations go, I think with Amarius Mims, that is the one legitimate area of weakness to his game. He is not very polished when it comes to run blocking. I think there's a lot more that you can get out of him in terms of generating movement at the point of attack, and that'll come with time and experience. With Trent Brown, he's more known as a pass protector. Like, he's still a quality run blocker, but I think that both of the right tackles right now, they're huge human beings, but they're so natural moving backwards, whereas moving forwards isn't necessarily the strength. It's definitely it's not like a negative with Trent Brown at all. Like, he's still a quality run blocker, but I think people look at the size of those 3 and they're not going to play all next to each other together necessarily, but even still the rest of the offensive line is pretty big. So a lot of that comes down to just leverage as well. So it's not always just about who's the tallest wins, but I think with Amarius Mims specifically adding to that group, that is actually the one area where he needs to improve the most, because his pass protection is already pretty good, but his run blocking could definitely use some growth.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I think again the focus with Mims and why the Bengals wanted to draft him and likely a handful of others in that first round was their ability, because they're hyper focused on TJ Watt and Myles Garrett, and you got to long-term limit the damage from those players. You have to. And so, if the run blocking never really catches up to the pass blocking for Mims, but he is able to, as a long-term player, able to hold his own against those 2 guys pretty regularly, that's a win in itself. Because I don't know about you, I am sick and tired of those 2 guys wrecking games for the Bengals. And so they needed something to solidify things. And here's the thing too. I mean, we talked about the running back and what they are or are not doing at that position. Joe Mixon brought a lot of good things to this offense. He was a highly productive player in this offense. The Bengals are pivoting on not only what they're looking for out of their running backs and the position group as a whole, but also in their interior defensive line, right? I mean, you look at it, the Bengals are, we mentioned, going kind of running back by committee here. They want guys who can pass protect. Moss can do that, right? They want guys that can kind of mix in and out and be out there in specific packages, specific plays that they're going to call. And it's kind of the same thing a little bit with, the mix of Hill and Rankins and Jenkins. And then, you put in McKinley Jackson in there, kind of the bigger body guy finally that they add in there. But, I mean, they're getting kind of more nimble and maybe a tiny bit more interior pass rush, especially with Rankins. That's kind of where they're going, and not the big Reader and Tupou type, right? At least not to this point. So there's a little bit of a pivot as to what they're looking for out of those 2 position groups.
Yeah, as far as biggest questions that need to be answered before the season, it is what type of scheme they're running up front with these guys. Because with Reader, you could just place him as a shaded 1 or a 2-eye and just take on 2 blockers, and there's nothing to worry about, right? That he's going to hold his own. He's going to be able to read the running back because he's tall enough to do that. Shed 1 block, fill the gap, boom, bam, done. That's who DJ Reader was at his peak. That's what the Detroit Lions are signing him to do now. They don't really have a guy to do that. McKinley Jackson is a little short. He's 6'1.5". He's still 330, 325. He still has decent arm length, right? It's nearly 34-inch arms. But that wasn't really his game at Texas A&M. He was more but before Reader came into town, when the days of Domata Peko, he was kind of that one gap nose shaded against the center. And again, that's the true. That's what a true even front is. You just have guys just with one gap responsibilities. That's what Pat Sims was when he rotated for Peko. Like this was life before DJ Reader, before you had that elite nose. They don't have that elite nose anymore. And I think when they signed Sheldon Rankins and they didn't sign a nose tackle, that was like the beginning of this transition. I think they may be going towards a true all-around one-gap type of defensive front. And McKinley Jackson's the perfect nose tackle to do that because he can get upfield. He's got some juice for being 325, 330. He had even more backfield production than Chris Jenkins. And again, like he's a bigger player than him, so you wouldn't expect that. But yeah, like I think how they handle those responsibilities up front with rotating these guys is going to be very interesting because I think Chris Jenkins can also be a shaded nose. Like he's got the length and the quickness to do that, but that's obviously going to be where McKinley Jackson maybe only plays. Like he might have the tendencies of a 3 technique, but like the body size, like he's still able to take on power and whatnot in some of this down blocks. So the scheme is probably destined to change unless they make this surprising move to bring in like a true 2-gappy nose tackle because right now they don't really have on the roster. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. They still have more capable bodies at just both defensive tackle spots than they did last year. But I think with the personnel they have now, it's bound to look different.
Well, I mean, again, it's a little bit kind of by committee, like the running back situation, right? It's just, where let's mix and match and plug and play where guys, in situations where guys are gonna flourish, even if it's on a little bit more limited downs, limited snaps. This is what we're going to need out of these groups. So, yeah, interesting class to say the least from the Cincinnati Bengals. And, I'm very curious to see how on the defensive side of the ball, how Lou works that defensive line and how he works the safety position. Because they also brought in Dijon Anthony towards the end of the draft and kind of a hybrid player. We didn't really talk about him. A guy who's kind of a hybrid player, right? He was either a big nickel, kind of a safety as well. I think I see him in a little bit in the mold of a Trey Flowers type of role, kind of limited snaps in, close to the football, close to the line of scrimmage. I don't think he plays all that well with deep stuff, but he hits hard. He plays bigger than really his size. And I think he's a versatile player. So he mixes in with that safety group or that defensive back group where Lou's just going to kind of, shuffle around. Let's get guys moving around. And I think the Anthony pick too, since we didn't really talk about him too much, you're wondering about, DJ Ivey had a late season knee injury, right? And he was a valuable gunner. He was a valuable player for a guy who was a 7th round pick last year. And so this might be a little bit of an insurance policy there as well, even though he wouldn't be necessarily a boundary corner. But he could help you out on special teams, and he's got a great last name too.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Decent first name too. It doesn't spell like John, but it sounds like it. So I rock with his name for sure. But yeah, with Ivy getting injured that late in the season, you just don't know what you're going to get out of him this year because Cheeto suffered a torn ACL in October of 2022, and he wasn't really his full self until maybe like December of 2023. So obviously every ACL injury is different, and we're going to hopefully get more information on him as the offseason progresses. But that's probably why they felt the need to take a guy like Josh Newton. Like I know that they graded him higher than the 5th round pick, but like that definitely felt like that's the last point where you can maybe even take a cornerback and expect anything from him. And with Anthony, and not you, but Dijon Anthony, it is a matter of how they kind of view him because you're right. He only played 1 year at Ole Miss, but he was used all over the field. And I think because of his lack of deep speed, he only ran like a 4.55. He's like 6 foot, 195. He is in the mold of like either a nickel defender or like a box safety. And the problem is they have a ton of those guys already, right? Like Tyson Anderson is their only true backup to Geno Smith as a free safety. So if they keep Dijon, like they're going heavy at safety with 5, or maybe they cut a guy like Jalen Davis, who's like that only slot cornerback who also offers special teams depth. So him and Cedric Johnson definitely have the toughest fights in training camp to actually make this team for sure.
So we've talked about now crowded position groups, the safety group, somehow the tight end group all of a sudden got crowded. Wide receivers really crowded also. A lot of competition happening there now going forward. What do the Bengals need to do? Where else do you see some places that they could plug in some veteran free agents that are floating out there? I know you on A to Z Sports.com recently put out, and hopefully you talked about that we were on the front end, the front lines of this of a specific cornerback acquisition that could be a really good one for the Bengals as a short-term veteran solution. They did get Newton in the 5th round, a guy that I think Lou likes, but there's maybe a little bit of limitations there, but at least provides some depth. But they may want some veteran guys out there like an Adoree Jackson, who is still lingering out there.
Yeah, and you said it like a month ago or whatever, and it made sense then, and it makes sense now as that post-draft addition, someone who was a former first-round pick. He's got more athleticism than I think most of the cornerbacks that they have backing up their starters, and obviously the experience doesn't hurt either. It is maybe their biggest question mark entering the season outside of defensive tackle, where that's another position where, like, dream scenario, they go after like a Calais Campbell, who can just give you that 2-capping nose, even, at the outlier size that he is. He's clearly made it work at 37, 38 years old. So that's another guy. But cornerback is definitely where my eyes go first, because like you have Josh Newton and Dax Hill essentially competing for a starting job with DJ Turner. And Josh Newton's 5th-round pick, doesn't have a ton of speed with him. He's probably looking like a backup for the majority of his time in Cincinnati. So if your other option with DJ Turner is someone who was a slot defender at Michigan in college, who became a free safety for his first 2 years in the NFL, and now he's expected to compete at boundary cornerback, there's not a lot of confidence from me personally. So Adoree Jackson makes a ton of sense to really round out the team. And, obviously I want to hear your thoughts on that, but also we probably have to talk about the fact that Dax Hill officially is a cornerback and like the implications of that. But like Adoree Jackson though, like he still makes sense to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lou likes the veteran, the random veteran quarterback, and now you're kind of ramping up Cam Taylor-Britt into that veteran status, right? Entering his 3rd season, it seems that like they've got a pretty high level of regard for DJ Turner, right? If they didn't, you kind of felt like maybe they would have gone corner on night 2 if that's something that they wanted to spring for. So they didn't. This is kind of where the Eli Apple-ish type of signing makes sense. And I think Jackson fits that. He's still got some speed, made some plays for the Giants recently. Obviously hasn't lived up to that 1st-round billing that he's had. But, I think he can give you a couple things and some veteran depth, especially if there are, God forbid, some injuries to that position group, or if, the Dax Hill thing doesn't work out, if DJ Turner takes a step back, that sort of thing. You want to have that kind of, fallback option, continuity, if you will, in terms of a veteran guy who's been around the league for a bit.
Yeah, and the fact that they have constantly relied on their 4th cornerback for the past 4 years now, ever since Trey Waynes went down with injury, they've consistently had to go to that spot in the depth chart for snaps, for significant snaps that maybe last the entire year. At first it was Eli Apple, then last year it became DJ Turner when Cheeto wasn't ready to go for the season, and then that whole position and those two and their dynamic was just pretty much the same throughout the years. So right now your 4th cornerback is Dax Hill. Like, we kind of knew that he was going to be a cornerback after they signed 2 safeties in free agency, and then Zach wanted to wait until, in his words, the clarity of the draft kind of cleared that up and they could officially release it to the public, even though, again, we already kind of were ahead of that front. And again, like a guy who has defended the slot for the majority of his college career. It's what got him drafted in the 1st round. They projected the skill sets to translate at a completely different position. It didn't work out for a year. Now he's back in the same position group, in the same room that he's used to being in for the meetings and the drills and whatnot, but it's still a completely different position. You're still dealing with different types of release packages. You're mirroring different types of routes. You're dealing with different types of athletes, even if athleticism is not necessarily Dax Hill's weak points. So right now, if he's your 4th cornerback, a guy that played 30-something snaps in his career at the position in college, he's never really played it in the NFL outside of maybe a couple of them in emergency situations as a rookie. It is a little terrifying. Like, you have no idea how he's going to translate there. I think it's ultimately not really going to matter for him. I don't think he's going to see significant time there. I don't really foresee him winning that battle, and he's just going to take over from Mike Hilton in a year. But aside from him, man, it's just a 5th-round rookie and nothing else. So I think a free agent is definitely needed there.
Yeah. I mean, that's really kind of one of the more glaring areas. I mean, even backup quarterback Bengals solidified that with Jake Browning, and they brought in Logan Woodside. That was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, we talked about maybe a running back. There's some people I saw on Twitter kind of having a conversation or maybe a monologue, depending on how you view that platform, but kind of throwing out the idea of, hey, maybe Samaje Perine with Estime going over to Denver. Maybe Perine gets cut as, one of the later cuts, and maybe he latches back on to the Bengals in a supplemental role. Who knows? So I think maybe running back is one to watch, and then cornerback. But I mean, overall, I don't see a ton of areas wherein the Bengals are gonna, really go after some of these rental deals that they have kind of traditionally done over the last handful of seasons.
Yeah, and signings right after the draft is, again, it's pretty rare for them. They did it last year with Trevor Siemian. They had him on a visit, well before last year's draft, and they signed him immediately afterwards when they didn't draft one. There wasn't really a situation like that happened this year. Like, they had reported interest in one cornerback, and it was Christian Fulton. He signed with the Chargers to potentially be a starter. Yeah. So outside of that, it's been pretty much crickets with cornerback. So I think that they feel like they're really confident that Dax Hill has a good chance of doing something and being a quality player there. It's obviously more projection than anything, and we're going to see how he practices there, and we're going to see if he actually does end up pushing DJ Turner. But that is the best case scenario, right? Even if he doesn't win that job, if he's competent enough to come in emergency situations, and if DJ Turner just, continues to maybe regress like he did towards the end of last season, if you put him in there in some situations, if he looks good, then obviously that's a huge bonus, because right now he's a first-round pick entering year 3, and he's not locked in a starter job, and that's been a problem for a lot of these premium picks in recent years. But I think to wrap up with this class, though, it does seem like they're high-quality athletes with solid production profiles, but more important than anything, they have legitimate plans to play these guys at their natural positions. Like, there are clear paths to them getting onto the field within the year at the positions that they should play, that they did play in college. It seems very simple to just say this, but like that was a problem with Jackson Carman. That was a problem with Zach Carter. That was a problem with Dax Hill. Like those are 3 positions that not all of them are just burned on fire, but maybe 2 of them are. And the fact that like those are premium picks on players that had major question marks with how you were going to use them or just how they were in college, I don't think you really have that entering the roster this year. Even going back to free agency, I think those were all solid players playing positions that they know how to play, and I think the draft kind of reflected that too, and that's why there's a sense of confidence outside of maybe cornerback and nose tackle with the state of this roster.
Square peg, round hole, right? I mean, that's been a thing that the Bengals have done a lot of times with a lot of trench players, right?
Yeah.
A lot of trench players. And so, and that dates back to way into the Marvin Lewis. I remember Jason Shirley, and I mean, this goes way back. And they just kind of think that, a jack of all trades, master of none sometimes is a better thing, when in fact, like you said, now they're kind of specifically drafting players for specific areas and to play their respective positions in which they're accustomed. And so that is going to hopefully pay dividends for the Bengals. We're going to be here just a couple more minutes. I want to end on this, and I hate to end on the bucket of cold water. But to me, and they're not really about the draft picks, it is about the draft sort of. But to me, as night 2 came and went of this year's class, this told me that the Bengals are not going to move T. Higgins nor Trey Hendrickson. To me, I think that last push, or it may not be the last push, but that day before push from both of these players in their representation, talking about basically, give me the deal I want or I walk, or trade me. The Bengals, I think, if something were to materialize, it would have happened on those first 2 nights, I think, because I think if the Bengals were to spring for something, they would have had to have got something, a premium pick or premium picks in this year's class to remedy the losses of those players. And then on top of it, yes, they drafted Burton in the 3rd round, but there's no big draft investment in an edge rusher. It was a day 3 investment, and I think there's upside with the player there. But to me, there wasn't, a specific, we're drafting these guys as well to replace them right now at this moment, and that we are also going to get capital tonight that we can use. So to me, I think, again, this stalemate continues. I know you had a very interesting discussion based on a recent report put out by a local publication. And I read it, John, and everybody should go read that on A to Z Sports. I read that, and it made a lot of sense with, what the Bengals are paying already per year with this franchise tag, even though it's a 1 year thing, and what's being asked, so my point in saying all of this and in turning the question back on you, I don't think that these guys are going to be moved at this point. I think if they were, they would have moved them that last weekend, especially right before that push from the other side to get them traded or get them a new deal. I don't know what that means for their contracts with the Bengals going forward, but I do not see them moving them this offseason. That's just my take.
Yeah. The draft came, and the first round, when that ended and there were 6 receivers picked, like that was the tipping point for any potential Higgins trade. Like, I don't think they were trading him ever for a day 2 pick. I think that had to be blown away with some type of first round package. And I don't know if that ever came to be because, again, there were 6 receivers taken in the first round. I don't think anyone was really desperate enough to trade for Teagan. The Jaguars traded back 6 spots and still got Brian Thomas. So I don't think there was ever
that was a great pick by them.
Yeah. So I don't think there was ever that true thing with Trey Hendrickson and his representation. I give him props for having the cojones to put in the I'll threaten retirement because, again, when you look at Bengals trade history, it's 2 that really stand out. The most recent one was Carlos Dunlap almost throwing hands with Lou Narumo on the sideline, leaking the depth chart before games, putting his house up for sale, making just a huge mess of the situation. And then there was Carson Palmer, who threatened to retire and didn't end up playing the first 7 games of the 2011 season. That was the only time that the Bengals eventually stood off of their stance and just bided their time until they got an offer that they really wanted. And, of course, that's how Palmer got traded to the Raiders. No one on earth believes Trey Hendrickson is retiring. It was, albeit a creative effort to try to gain some leverage there, but I think it was a latch-stitch, like, why the hell did we take this 1-year deal? Do we really think the Bengals are going to try to renegotiate a year after they put in this extension? Let's just throw this Hail Mary and see what happens. It didn't work. The Bengals were never going to move off of that. They still expect Trey Hendrickson to be there because at the end of the day, T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson are both really high-quality players that give the Bengals a good chance to win the Super Bowl. And if you qualify as that and you are not actually going to sit out of games, you are going to be on the team.
Yep. And, I mean, there is a track record with the Bengals and players demanding trades, and it's got to make a whole lot of sense for the Bengals to quote unquote flinch or cave or whatever you want to say. And like I said, I just draft weekend came and went, and I just kind of knew that wasn't that wasn't going to be the case going forward. Anyway, let's drop the mic and get on out of here. You guys probably know, and we'll make a big formal announcement and all that kind of stuff. But we have transitioned the audio side of things on the Believe network. One of our shows may be adding a new familiar face, and that hasn't been finalized yet. And it's not our show. I will say that, but I will let them make the announcement when that happens. But pretty exciting if that does come through there. He's one of our friends, and at least friends from afar for me, and a guy that a lot of people are familiar with. So that'll be pretty cool if that does indeed come to fruition. And the other thing too, we do have a really cool. We're lining up some other stuff as well on this show with some other interviews and special guests. There is going to be another special guest interview coming up in a couple of weeks. It'll be on all of our channels here, as well as probably cincyjungle.com. And so you won't want to miss that. Can't really divulge too many details on that, but it is a pretty high profile guest. So we're pretty excited about that. So that'll be coming your way in a couple of weeks.
I have a more less clerical mic drop, I guess. There were 2 instances this week where Bengals fans were really mad at decisions made by the team The first one, I guess, was them not putting a cool logo in midfield. And I don't really have an argument against the fans who wanted a leaping tiger or tiger head. I think that would have looked dope. But I do want to stand up and plant my flag and play defense against the slander for a wide receiver choosing the number 81. And with this Jermaine Burton, that's his number that he's going to wear with the Bengals. He was obviously number 3 with Alabama. And there was implications that, hey, if he's number 3 for the Bengals, that's T. Higgins 5, Jamar Chase 1, Jermaine Burton 3, and he chose 81. And I get that there may have been disappointment that you weren't going to see that permutation reflecting the Cincinnati area code for a year so long as T. Higgins is here. But to turn around and say 81 is a bad number for wide receivers, which I saw this many a time on Twitter.
I can't believe that was said.
Is ludicrous. Like not just for NFL history, like just off the bat, just Randy Moss with New England, Terrell Owens, who wore the number with the Bengals, but more prominently for the Cowboys and the Eagles and whatnot. Torrey Holt, who if he's in the Hall of Fame already, he should be in the Hall of Fame with the greatest show on turf. But even in Bengals history, like that was Eddie Brown, that was Carl Pickens, that was T.O. for that 1 year he's here. That is a great number specifically for a vertical threat at receiver, and that's exactly who Jermaine Burton is. I have no idea why that number is getting slandered. I understand, like, obviously single digit numbers for receivers are great, but number 1's already taken by Jamar Chase, and that's by far the best one. I'm not really vibing with the teens either. Like, the 80s are still, they still have class to them. Like, there's still a classic number for a receiver to pick, and there's a lot of history, a great history and precedent with that number. So I have no idea why 81 was getting dragged like that, but it's a solid number for Jermaine Burton.
It is a solid number. Did you know, John, that Carl Pickens was not always number 81, though? Did you know that? He started his career as number 80. Yeah, he was 80, and then he moved to 81. But yeah, of course, the more productive version of Carl Pickens was wearing that 81. And so, anyway, 81. Don't hate on it. It's a good number.
Ridiculous. This
has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John. I'm Anthony. And we are going to get on out of here. Subscribe to our channel on the Believe Network. We'll put that in the show description. We're going to start tweeting that link out too, and make sure that you guys all resubscribe and get to it. You could also go to the Believe podcast page and put up Believe in Cincy and see our queue of shows that we've started to put up. We'll kind of backlog some of our old library as well, so you can kind of go back and get some of this stuff. But so go check it out there and get that through your favorite audio streamer. We're through all the major ones. And then, of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well by clicking that button at the bottom of the screen, the show icon, and doing the whole subscribe, thumbs up, bell thing. Go do that. Give a thumbs up to the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. And, of course, go check out what John's doing at azsports.com and all the coverage that we're providing at cincyjungle.com as well. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John. Have a good weekend, sir. Go be very cosmopolitan out there at the World Fair with that shirt on, my friend.
Thank you, Anthony. See you guys later.
All right. Take care.